Australia, and China. Two nations separated by nearly 5,000 miles of ocean. Yet, in the last 20 years, they've become more connected than anyone could have ever imagined. Every year, Australia ships around $200 billion worth of its products to China. And in the last 2 decades, over 1.2 million Chinese citizens have moved to Australia to study, work, or build a new life. On the surface, this looks like the perfect partnership. A match made in economic heaven, creating jobs, fostering immense growth, and making both countries fabulously wealthy. But behind the scenes, a different, more troubling reality is unfolding. This partnership, this golden goose of the Australian economy, has secretly been crippling it. It's a dependency that affects everything from the price of your home and the quality of your education to the very security of the nation. It sounds strange, doesn't it? Australia is a rich country with a GDP per capita 5 times higher than China's. So how could this be? How has a relationship that started as a lucrative opportunity transformed into a crippling addiction to the world's second largest economy? And is there anything Australia can do to save itself before it's too late? To understand how a relationship that appears so beneficial is slowly breaking a country, we first need to go back in time. By the year 2000, China was undergoing one of the most radical economic transformations in human history. The old days of hardline communist policy were fading. The nation was opening its doors to the world, welcoming foreign investment, encouraging private business, and setting the stage for an unprecedented explosion of growth. Over 40 years, it would rocket from a developing nation on par with some of the world's poorest to the global superpower we see today. This colossal process of modernization created an insatiable, almost mythical demand for raw materials. China needed steel for its endless skyscrapers and bridges, coal to power its new cities, and natural gas to heat homes and fuel a tidal wave of industry. But there was one problem. These were resources China didn't have. But one country did: Australia. It was perfectly placed to answer the call. Already riding high on a mining and extraction boom that began in the 1960 AS, Australia was blessed with enormous natural resource deposits and the modern infrastructure needed to export them. The two countries quickly became inseparable partners. Australia dug up its minerals iron ore, coal, and sand, shipped them off to China. In return, a torrent of billions of dollars poured into the Australian economy. What followed was a spectacular economic boom. Australia's GDP per capita soared, putting it ahead of many of its developed world peers. Cities like Perth and Brisbane transformed into bustling hubs for the global mining industry. Thousands of high-paying jobs were created, not just in the mines themselves, but in all the supporting industries like logistics, engineering, and finance. For 3 decades, from 1990 to 2020, this partnership acted as a shield. Australia's economy didn't suffer a single full-blown recession. It miraculously dodged the savings and loans crisis of the 90s, the dot-com bubble of the 2000s, and even the 2008 global financial crisis that brought other Western economies to their knees. As China grew, Australia thrived, riding the wave of its success. The momentum seemed unstoppable, until it wasn't. Today, the Chinese economic miracle is showing its age. A shrinking workforce, declining exports, and a struggling, detritus real estate sector have been crippling its growth. In 2024, estimates suggest the Chinese economy grew by only 2.8%. While that's still growth, it's a world away from the double-digit rates of the past, and it's a disaster for a country whose entire economic model was built on that breakneck speed. This slowdown is a problem for China, but it's a catastrophe for a nation that has bet its entire future on China's success. And nowhere is the impact of this slowdown being felt more than in Australia. Exports to China, once the unshakable backbone of the Australian economy, are in freefall. A staggering $100 billion is expected to be wiped from export revenues in just the next 4 years alone. That's a quarter of the total. To put that in perspective, when the UK left the European Union, a move seen as economically devastating, its projected export loss was only around 6%. This is already having crushing effects on the mining and agricultural sectors, the two great pillars of the Australian economy. But this is just the beginning. Polling has indicated that more than half of Australian companies would be forced to cut jobs if exports to China fell. Take the Pilbara region in Western Australia. Its economy is almost entirely centred around resource extraction. Over half of all jobs there come from mining iron ore. And of all the iron ore they dig up, almost 80% is sold to China. This isn't an isolated case. It's a nationwide problem. The BN region in Victoria sells dairy products and 40% of them go to China. These towns, utterly dependent on a single customer, are littered across the country. The golden trading opportunity has turned from a blessing into a curse. But it wasn't just goods that Australia opened its doors to. It was money. And that has created a whole other vulnerability. China's economic boom created a new social class, the ultra-wealthy investor. Owners of enormously profitable businesses looking for safe, stable places to park their wealth. Their solution? Australia. It was perfect, politically stable, with strong institutions, and much closer than Europe or North America. Since the 2008 financial crisis, China has invested over $153 billion in Australia. This means many iconic Australian companies are now, in part or in whole, Chinese-owned. Take Energy Australia. It provides electricity and gas to nearly 2 million Australian customers, dominating 15% of the market. It's owned by a Hong Kong-based company. Or consider the port of Darwin, one of the most strategically important ports in the entire country. It was leased to a Chinese-owned company for 99 years. For the average citizen, escaping this influence is practically impossible. The profits from the electricity you use, the port your goods arrive at, and countless other products and services you buy, go in part to China. This is the result of decades of Australian firms selling their assets for a quick profit, and it comes at the expense of the country's long-term wealth. By sending profits abroad, it is China, not Australia, that gets rich from Australian industry. The Chinese buyers aren't just interested in companies. They're interested in property. In a typical year, Chinese investors pour upwards of $3.2 billion into Australian real estate. That is more than the next 10 countries combined. This massive influx of cash is pushing the cost of buying and renting a home to astronomical levels, squeezing the budgets of ordinary Australian families. In the affluent Melbourne suburb of Toorak, all major home sales in the last 6 months were to Chinese buyers. In many parts of the country, prices have been pushed so high that locals can no longer afford to live in the communities they grew up in. As China's economy grew, it wasn't just the investor class that looked to Australia, but the booming middle class. Thousands of families, wanting better opportunities for their children, saw Australia's world-class universities as the ultimate prize. Today, Australia hosts around 820 international students. About a quarter of them are from China. Now, consider that Australia's entire population is only 26 million people. This means that right now, 1 in every 28 people in Australia is an international student. Universities love this because international students pay significantly higher fees, up to $50,000 a year, compared to the capped $14,000 for a domestic student. In the short term, it seems like a great deal. The universities get extra cash and Australian students get a subsidised education. But there's a huge problem. This financial incentive encourages universities to accept international students over Australian applicants. Every place filled by a full fee-paying international student is one less place for a local citizen. At Australia's top universities, the proportion of international students can climb as high as 45%. But the most damaging part is what happens after graduation. Close to 90% of international students who study in Australia do not stay in the country long term. They take their world-class education and their valuable skills back home. This is a brain drain on a scale usually only seen in developing nations. The very skills in engineering, finance, and technology that Australia desperately needs to build a modern, service-based economy are being educated in Australia and then exported. This crippling dependence has reached the highest level of all, Australia's own government. For years, the government has generated huge amounts of revenue by taxing those massive exports to China. This is the money that pays for healthcare, for schools, for the military. But as the Chinese economy slows, that river of tax revenue is drying up. It's projected to be reduced by $8.5 billion every single year. For context, Australia's entire annual defence budget is only $34 billion. To fill this rapidly emerging black hole, the government faces two terrible options: raise taxes on its citizens, or make deep cuts to public services. Both are political poison, especially at a time when job losses are mounting in mining and agriculture. This creates a dangerous double-edged sword. At the exact moment government revenue is falling, the demand for welfare support will be rising. It's a perfect storm that threatens the economic stability the country has enjoyed for 30 years and could easily push Australia into a full-blown recession. What started as a golden opportunity aid partnership that promised wealth, jobs, and growth has morphed into a precarious reliance on a single, slowing economy. From mining and agriculture to education and housing, almost every corner of Australian life is now tied to China. This relationship has undeniably shaped modern Australia, but it has also left the country fragile and dangerously exposed. The cracks are already starting to show. Job losses, budget shortfalls, and a loss of control over critical industries are all warning signs that this dependency isn't sustainable. But this is by no means a lost cause. Australia is still one of the richest, most innovative countries in the world. It has options. Diversifying its trade partners, investing in new, emerging domestic industries, and creating policies to keep its skilled, talented graduates at home are just a few of the steps it can take to break free. With the right economic policy, the nation can shift away from its current trajectory. But the final, most important question remains. Given the path its government has taken for the last 20 years, does it have the will to change?